Today's topic is What About Considering SETT? Subtitled, A Framework for Assistive Technology Consideration. I'm Nora Reid. I'm a speech language pathologist in the district.
And I'm Nicole, Quast, a physical and health disabilities teacher in the district.
And we are both members of the Assistive Technology Assessment Team through 916. So we are part of a specialized team that goes out and does assistive technology assessments in our member districts. You may or may not know that about us, but now you do. So we want to talk about consideration. Earlier this year, Jay Fairman went out and met with many programs and talked about considering assistive technology in the IEP process. And I think that Jay pointed out that you have to do this. This is part of the IDEA law. You have to sit down and think about assistive technology for each student that you do. It's required. And I think in 916, our discussion as a team has really been about how, because we are very tech savvy and tech heavy in this district, we often don't really have this discussion that's based on an individual student's needs because we have so much technology. There's a lot of it. We've got smart boards, we've got iPads, we've got computers, we have all of this stuff, and we may not actually be sitting down and wrapping our heads around what an individual student needs to succeed. And it's often overwhelming. It's really hard to sit and talk about this at an IEP meeting when you feel the time is crunched and you don't have enough time to sit and think about kids and what kids' specific needs might be. And we don't have a lot of guidance right now. There's an old and very outdated form in campus that lists tools, some of which haven't existed for 20 years. So that tool list is not really a way to consider technology. It's really just a list of tools that may or may not be solutions for kids. So we want to figure out ways that we can guide those discussions with our IEP teams.
So some more things to consider when looking at assistive technology are to make sure that you're doing it on an individual basis. It shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all for the program. It should be unique to each student's needs, and it should have the goal and objectives in mind. So the tool of the goals and objectives on their IEP, what tools do they need or may not need to meet those goals and objectives? So it could be that to write a paragraph, Johnny needs a speech to text tool to meet, for writing, or simple as low tech visual aids need to be used for Sally to complete her morning routine. So just make sure that you're tying them to goals and objectives, and it's okay that not everyone on the IEP team maybe feels comfortable with assistive technology. It's helpful if there's a few people on the team that have that as their strong suit, but it's a learning process for everyone and just needs to be considered, and tools need to continue to be explored for each individual. And now we're going to move on and talk to you about the SETT framework.
So the author of the SETT framework is a lady by the name of Joy Zabala. And she's been big in assistive technology for a long time. If anybody has ever attended Closing the Gap, you've probably seen her at some point in time. And her vision, I'll let her talk about it, but she wanted to help teams build a vision for students by having common understanding. So it's really a framework for how you're going to consider things. But we'll let her do some talking.
And at that time, Diana and I were also making a presentation with another colleague at Closing the Gap. When we were talking about legal issues, practical applications, and then the third session was integrated IEPs, so that AT was not something separate but integrated. And in my 1 hour session was on implementation. And I, at that particular, I think it was 1995, I was doing my little thing, and I said, you have to think not just about the student, but the environment in which the student's expected to function and the tasks that they need to be able to do before you start thinking about the tools, because you want to know how you're going to use these tools to help this student in these environments do these tasks. I said you could sort of think about that as maybe SETT, the SETT framework, S-E-T-T. And after I finished, Diana said, so where did you get that? And I said, I made that up. And she said, you can't do that. And I said, oh, well, okay, well, I did. And so the next year, the exciting thing was is that the SETT framework appeared in probably the descriptors of a half a dozen or a dozen different presentations. And the exciting thing about that is, well, there's nothing about the SETT framework that is anything but common sense. It's things that people can keep in their mind. We know we need to know who's going to use something, where they're going to use it, and what they're going to use it for, before we start figuring out how they're going to do that thing. So the SETT framework has been one of the more exciting parts of my professional career, because many, many people use it, and many people have just done wonderful things with it. It's the fact that it's a framework and not a protocol means that adapt in any way you want. The only thing that you have to be sure that you do is you don't pick tools without thinking about the student that's going to use them, where they're going to use them, and what they're going to use them for.
Okay, so what does the catchy acronym stand for? She told you, right? Students, environment, task, and tools. So if you want to take a look at the very first piece of paper that we gave you, the one that talks about this framework, this is your blank form. Looks kind of intimidating. We'll have a copy of it when you get your Google Drive link to this presentation. There's a copy of it in there for you. So let's take a look at what this is all about. The first thing you think about is the student. So let's think about the student. He's the star of the show, right? And you want to build a profile of your student that considers all of these things. Their physical needs and challenges, sensory needs and challenges, how they communicate, what are their abilities to communicate, that's what we're all about, and cognitive skills and challenges. And you can always add details, but if you can sketch out some basic things about kids, it really helps. So if you look at this particular document, it kind of gives you a guide about the kinds of things that you want to think about when you're thinking about kids. So you've got your basic, what I call the basic foundational functional needs of kids as the primary focus. Physical needs, sensory needs, and communication needs are huge. And if those aren't met, you can't really get anyplace else with a child in a school environment. So you really need to consider these things. First, does this child have physical needs? Are they a child in a wheelchair? Are they a child that uses a walker? Are they a child that has braces? Do they have other types of physical needs? You have to consider those types of things about them. I think they're really primary to a student. And their sensory needs. We have lots of students at 916 that have huge sensory needs. And without getting those sensory needs met somehow, a lot of the other things that we're asking them to do in different environments and doing different tasks are very challenging if those needs aren't met. And we all know about communication, right? You could talk about some of the rest of them.
Mm-hmm. And students might have needs in all these areas, and I think it's important as a team that you prioritize those needs. What needs to be kind of resolved or met first to make the other ones maybe fall into place. And I'm not saying, like for you guys, you might think communication's the most important. I think for many of us, I think communication's the most important. And just getting your personal needs met, which is oftentimes communicating. So, but you know, you might not be able to communicate if your sensory needs aren't being met, and the lighting's not right, and the environment's not matching. So it's hard maybe to prioritize too as a team, you know, because you don't really know what comes first, you know. Is it the sensory impacting, or is it the communication impacting? Is it both? Is it their physical impairment and they're having pain? It's hard to know, especially when students are nonverbal. So you guys understand that well. It's being speech pathologists. But so like I said, there's lots of areas. They could have needs in all those areas, but to prioritize and start somewhere is very important.
And some kids won't. So you might not be looking at vocational performance, obviously, if you're looking at an elementary school student. But you might be looking at it at the transition age. So Wells South or Wells North clearly could be looking at what they're doing on the job sites and what's important on the job sites, as opposed to perhaps their academic performance at that stage of life. So it's a tool that kind of just gives you a way to think about things, think about the student before you actually start thinking about piling on the different tools that you're going to use with this kiddo as time goes on.
And I started talking about the environment. So the environment, is the next part of the SETT process, and it includes multiple things that we might not think about. It's not just the classroom or the lunchroom or the bus, it's the people they work with, the curriculums they interact with. Do they like the para? Do they not like the teacher? It's all those things that affect them in their environment. Is the lighting right? Is it too noisy? There's so many factors in the environment, not just thinking beyond just the walls they're within. So, and then there's other possible environmental barriers. What do you guys see at some of your sites that may be barriers for students that you work with?
Anybody have parents they work with who aren't comfortable with technology? Okay, that could potentially be a barrier if the team has somehow decided that this kid really needs really high-tech equipment, and they decided that the only way that the student's technology needs could be met is if he has a high-tech speech output device. But there's no one on the team in any of the environments he works in that knows how to do anything with that device. So you have to start thinking about barriers as not just being environmental, but also being personal barriers. It'll help you wrap around the ideas that you can have lots of different ways to approach communication. As an example, with the same student, you might have low-tech solutions in one area, and you might have high-tech solutions in another. And you might still have a global wraparound voice output communication aid that he uses throughout his lifetime, but he might just need a core board in a classroom or a strip of some sort. So it's really kind of thinking through and troubleshooting all of those different environmental impacts for kids. And tasks. What do we want them to do? Seems pretty straightforward. Well, we want them to talk, or we want them to write, or we want them to type is generally what you'll get, or we want them to read. So if you start listing all of those tasks and really breaking them down, it will help you come to some decisions when you consider the fact of who that student is, where they are, and the kinds of things that they have to do. And then when you're at this point and you're looking at tasks, then you can really start to take a look at the personal things that are standing in that student's way of accomplishing those tasks, given the rest of the framework that you've already worked through. Does that make sense? So you look at those tasks, and then finally, we have another form for you. So that's the next one that you're looking at. And this is one that our assistive technology assessment team has started to use this year to help guide us when we're going out and meeting students we're not familiar with. So we're going out to a member district and we'll get a referral and we'll say that Johnny has some needs, and I'm going to show you one of those next. This blank form can be fillable as it will go in the Google Drive. So you will have the option of being able to type on it, so you don't have to do it all by handwriting. So this next one is the completed one, which I attached to this. So this is a student that I'm working with this year. It just kind of gives you an example of how you can go about filling this out so you can get some of the ideas of who the kid is, what environments we had to deal with, and the kinds of tasks that they wanted this child to do. So this particular child is in a level 3 classroom in one of our member districts. He has a whole array of different things that are impacting him, including a developmental delay. He's got a history of seizures, he wears glasses, he's got low muscle tone, he's got a lot of things. It's a picture not unlike the picture of many of the students that we have at 916. He does have some behaviors. They're just not really large behaviors at this point. He's also got some skills, so you want to note the kinds of skills that the child has as well. He can do some talking. He can find his way around. He can locate things in his environment pretty well. So he's got skills. He knows how to use switches. He's in groups that are very nicely structured with switches, and so he's very accurate with doing those kinds of tasks. And he's in small groups sometimes, and then sometimes those groups get bigger. So it's looking at all of those different environments. He goes to adaptive phy-ed, just like many of our kids do. He goes to a sensory room, he goes to lots of different places. And then we had to look at, what do we need to have him do? And the issue for this child, as speech pathologists who'll be interested, he can do some talking, but his intelligibility is really low. Because of his low muscle tone and his history of seizures, it's hard to understand him. So the team, all of his teachers and the paras really wanted him to be able to have consistent ways to respond in classes, and everybody on the team thought that he knew more than he was allowed to express just using 2 switches. So we had to look at it that way. So it was very specific. What we were looking at was very specific. Does that make sense? So then the last thing that we do is we look at tools. And this is this fun form here. They're last for a reason, because we've already done this other part. We've looked and we've done a systematic review of what they need and look at what may already be available. That's the part we'll get to, especially in 916. And then look at what the program provides and look at what additional supports they might need.
So this is the tool that you guys all have, and it lists the descriptors, which are kind of what you're wanting the student to do. Maybe to participate in the morning meeting, to participate in a literacy activity, to express his wants and needs, to write a paragraph, those types of things. And then possible tools you can write are tools that you have available. So maybe in some of our programs, or I think all of our programs, we have smart boards, iPads. We might even have specific apps that do speech to text. You can write those specific apps down. You can think about positioning tools like, does the student need a mount? Yes, we have a mount that the ATL has, we know. Does he need 2-switch scanning? You know, you could put the switches on there. You can put all sorts of different tools. And then what you kind of do is you go across and say, can the smart board meet this need, or have we tried it? You mark it and say we tried it, successful, not successful. You can jot notes. I think we have a question from the audience. Oh, okay. No, we don't. We don't have a question.
I have a question for him. So since we're talking about tools, are we specifically looking at the tools available through the district, or are we looking at tools that they may be using like at home that are personal kind of tools that they own or their families own?
I think you can look at both, and I think first and foremost you want to look at the tools that are available that you have and see, can these tools meet the needs without exploring and finding new tools, because those are already available to you. Multiple students are already using them in your programs, and tools from home, there's always, I guess, that safety factor. If it breaks, who pays for it, what happens to it? I'm not sure what the rules are in programs. Nora, can you speak to that?
I'm not sure what the rules are, but if it's a communication device that the student owns, the student should be bringing that to school. So if the student owns a Dynavox, then that Dynavox needs to come to school. And we need to figure out how we can incorporate that Dynavox into IEP goals. What will that student be using it for? If it's not actively being used because the team hasn't considered how they're going to do that, then a parent could conceivably say, I don't need to send that Dynavox. You need to do something else with tools that you already have. So I think in those situations, it's really taking a look and carefully considering, how do we work as a team to integrate what the student already owns and is familiar with into their school environment and their school day. So
how does that look like on the paperwork side of things with IEPs? Like, would we list a personal communication device in the AT section of the IEP?
you can list the personal communication device in the adaptation section. But the other thing that you really need to wrap your heads around is that you need to write a goal that is specific to using that personal communication device. And that doesn't mean that you're going to tie a goal that is just specific to that. But if you're going to write a communication goal, you can say Johnny will use his voice, gestures, pictures, or his voice output communication aid to greet his peers 3 out of 4 opportunities over 3 days. It needs to be in there, and then when it comes to academic goals, you could say Johnny needs to use his voice output communication aid and or pictures or symbols to answer 6 math questions out of 10. So it's really kind of framing the use of technology for an educational purpose. Does that make sense? Okay. So we did provide you with a completed one, and that's stapled to the back. So this is a 2-page form, so you can kind of get an idea of what this looks like when you start to work with it. And it's not that everybody needs to use these forms all the time. It's once you have wrapped your heads around using this type of process to consider assistive technology, the forms may become redundant. But I think it works really well to train yourselves and train your thought process to start thinking this way, and to really have those meaningful conversations when you sit down at the table with IEP teams and you have families involved, where you can say, here's what we want Johnny to do in math, here's what we want Johnny to do in reading. How do we accomplish that? You know, what kinds of tools can we give him? So you can go through that. And the nice thing about this tool, especially when we consider 916, is there are little keys down here for things that we already have. So it might be that there's already a smart board, there's already, you've already got a one-to-one iPad initiative in a classroom. You may already have picture symbols made for everybody in the classroom. There may already be adapted books. You may already be using different types of online programs for reading or online programs for mathematics. So you know that those types of tools are available to that child, so that you're not spending a lot of time trialing different things without first thoughtfully considering what it is you already have available to you.
And some of those tools might just have other access needs they have, like for a student with a physical impairment, you might need to use a switch instead of a mouse, or a one-click mouse instead of a 2-click mouse, or just things like that. So it might not be that the tool doesn't match, it might be that the access is the issue too. So to keep that in mind, and to keep in mind that tools should be, again, the last thing you can think of, or that you consider in the SETT process, that you do really think about who the student is, you know, what are the environments and what are the tasks before. It's a fun, you know, tools is kind of the fun part, and you want to think about that too, or how can this tool match that need versus it needs to kind of be the other way. How does the need match the tool?
The other nice thing about this form is it really considers the family, so that's where you can have that discussion about that home-owned communication device or home-owned piece of physical equipment that might not be coming to school, that would allow a child access to a complete environment, but they're not bringing it back and forth from home every day. So it allows you to have those conversations and to open up those conversations with families, so that you're making sure that the technology needs of the student are met at school every day with whatever is available, and that, you know, will also help you to provide more buy-in for families.
I think was your question.
I was going to
Heidi?
say, adding to what you had just said about the access not always matching, something I've noticed is even with the communication systems that already come in, often the page set just doesn't match the student. So they already have a whole system in place that was purchased for them. It's just a matter of figuring out, at least from a speech perspective, how can we set up that vocabulary in a way that the student can be successful, as opposed to, you know, just having whatever the template is, or something that's too difficult for the student or too basic for the student's needs.
Yeah.
And this provides you a tool to have that type of discussion.
Yeah.
Because you can say, all right, so we know that we want Johnny to answer questions about books in reading class. It's really important that he do that. So, gee whiz, Mom and Dad, can I make a page set for Johnny so that he's able to answer these questions in his class every day? And we're going to put that in his IEP, because that's going to be the goal that we're going to have for Johnny, is to answer those questions using his device. But I need to make this specialized page set for him. So it's really a way to get conversation going with families and really have that holistic discussion about what education looks like with assistive technology considerations in place.
Is this meant to be like a one-time a year process for each student, or is it sort of a working document that constantly is being edited?
I think that you can approach it as a working document, and my other thought about this, and I'm by no means the bottom line on this, I think once a team does it one time, you probably only need to tweak it every year. So the daunting part of doing that consideration process is really upfront. As you're working into it with each of the students that you have. Once you work through the process, it becomes easier and easier to say, oh, I can see that we could have maybe a technology solution here. Or it might be time to add another page to this student's Dynavox so this student can participate in science class or social studies class, because they're ready to do that now. So I think it's a fluid document. That would be our hope, is it's a fluid way of thinking about kids and what their needs are.
I think our 18 team has seen a lot of, oh, our student in our member district is up for an evaluation this year. Could you guys come out and do an AT evaluation to go along with it? Which is fine, and we're trying to use these documents, but as you can see, you know, what is it, a 30 days is the evaluation period. You can't do enough trials in 30 days to say, here's the tool that they should move forward with. So it kind of becomes this blanket statement of trials should continue and AT tools are being explored, and which is fine. So I think it's great to do, you know, to consider during an evaluation time, but again, needs to be more than every 3 years probably, even if it's just reviewing it, tweaking it. Are we using this? Exit off. Nope, that one didn't work. Kind of like we had on the example, dates were listed, we tried this, that type of thing. So, and know that, you know, a trial is more than a 1 or 2 time shot. You know, it has to keep going. Kids need, especially with motor impairments, need hundreds of attempts and trials to make sure a tool is useful for them. And you know, and some kids will really resist new tools for a long time. So just
They will. So it is a fluid thing, and you really should start looking at IEPs as they come up and look for what's said under was assistive technology considered. Oftentimes you'll see the statement, was considered and not needed. Probably not true, because you'll get a lot of those kids on your radar eventually, and you'll be asked to give them a communication device or to provide pictures for them. Or an OT may be asked to find writing adaptations or a wiggle cushion or some other type of sensory diet adaptations for a student when you'll see that line written right in the IEP. So our advice is consider it, and consider it systematically, and then you can say, yes, we considered it and here's what the outcome was. So finally, what's SETT all about? Students, environments, tasks, and tools. And now you're ready to go. Do you feel prepared and ready to go? We also compiled some additional resources for people, so each of those is a link that will take you to another site where you can get more information about the SETT framework, and you can study up a little bit more. So now you should be ready to open up those discussions at IEP and evaluation meetings about actually considering assistive technology for your individual students. Questions? All right, thank you.